So, you want to know how I got into guns? What was my first gun? How did I end up becoming such a gun enthusiast? The answer to that and more. Stay tuned. What's up, y'all, and welcome to the journey. Before we get started, I just gotta make sure I put it out there. I am not a trainer, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a professional. I'm just a regular enthusiast providing the details of my specific journey and my experiences. So take it for what it's worth, and we'll go from there, okay? So how did I become such a gun enthusiast, and what was my experience when I first got my firearms? All right, very straightforward, very easy. I started collecting in 2020 during when COVID happened. During I like to call it the toilet paper apocalypse. Everybody was going crazy for toilet paper, for toiletries. There was shenanigans going on all over the place, and I kind of seen the way things were going, so I felt it was necessary to find myself a method of protection that I can utilize for myself as well as the ones who I care for. So what I did was I had nobody to reach out to whatsoever. I did my own research, but at that, now looking back, I can realize that I did not do enough research for my first gun. My first gun was a Taurus G3. Nothing wrong with the Taurus whatsoever, but there are better firearms out there that I could have purchased at the time had I done better research, or had I had somebody to reach out to for information that would pretty much was putting it for what I needed for myself. But in either case, that was my first gun. Now, the reason why I specifically went with that gun, well, to be honest, it looked good. It was $300, so that fit within my price range also, because let's be honest, I did not really foresee or really understand the prices for different types of guns, and for the most part, $300 sounded legit at the time. I didn't know any better. Now, once again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Taurus G3, but there are better firearms out there. So for all intents and purposes, it did the job that I thought I was looking for, and that was my first gun. So it took about maybe 2 weeks before I got my gun. Had to have it shipped from online where I purchased it, bought it at a local gun store where it was shipped to, and came home and thought I was the ish. Point blank. My first gun. And for me, coming from West Indian heritage as well as living in New York primarily for the majority of my life prior to living in North Carolina, I did not know anything about guns whatsoever other than what I saw in movies and on TV shows. I had no exposure or experience whatsoever beforehand handling a gun or knowing the safety rules that are pretty much standard across the board now. I didn't have any of that knowledge whatsoever. So with that in mind, my knowledge base was very, very limited. Now, growing up in New York as well as having family in Jamaica, every single time I heard about anything gun related, it was always in a negative light. There was always some sort of violence associated with it. So it took a drastic change for me to consider buying one for myself, because once again, growing up and living in the areas where I lived, there was nothing but negative stigma associated with the gun. That changed once I saw everything that was transpiring around COVID and the panic that ensued because of that. And by this time, I was living in North Carolina for a little bit over 5 years, and I had procrastinated on purchasing something for myself. Once that whole hysteria hit, I said, no more, I need to get something for myself. So I went out, bought the gun, came home, thought I was the ish once again. Very happy. Now, as time passed and progressed, I started interacting with other people who had like-minded interests. And it wasn't until I joined NAGA, which is the National African American Gun Association, that I really started being around other people who were not only that looked like me, but also had similar interests to myself as well. And through them, I started learning more and more about firearms. And I also took it upon myself to take a class so that I can get somewhat familiar with my gun, as well as to get some exposure and experience with actually shooting it. Because personally, I believe that if you buy a gun, you should train with it, as opposed to buying it and letting it sit and automatically assuming that you know what you're doing. I learned very quickly that I didn't know one thing about my gun whatsoever, or how to properly use it, until I took the class, and also until after speaking with other people who had been shooting for a much longer time frame with better experience than I had. So for me, it went from having no exposure, no experience whatsoever, and from my gun being strictly a home defense firearm, to now that I've received exposure and have gone to the shooting range a number of times, to realizing that I actually like the gun. I actually enjoy going to the range. I enjoy shooting. For me, it was a nice outlet. Not to say that I had stress whatsoever, but in either case, sometimes you just want a little outlet just to get some of that negative energy that's been surrounding you. Even if you don't have any stress whatsoever, just that negative energy that surrounds you and that sometimes can cloud your happiness, whether it's caused by you or from outside sources, just being able to expunge that away from you felt great. And for me, going to the gun range gave me a lot of that kind of relief. So it went from strictly being all about, I gotta protect my own in my house, to now enjoying it. And once I started realizing that I enjoyed it, I wanted to expand on that knowledge and expand on that experience. And I decided to take a concealed carry class. So the concealed carry class, regardless of whether I was going to actually carry it on my person or not, taught me a lot. And from there, once I started looking into the aspects of concealed carry, the whole world of different firearms started coming into my attention span. And along with the knowledge and experience that I've acquired from listening to other members of NAGA and other people who have shooting experience talk, I started realizing that outside of my Taurus G3, there were a lot of guns that offered multiple options for me that I didn't even know existed. It went from the concealed carry for carrying on your body for self-protection outside the house, to obviously home defense options, but also guns that you can just have as what we call range toys, that you basically just want to use for when you go to the gun range and just have fun shooting at your targets. And even then, it goes from there to where you can actually do competitions, similar to what you would see for like archery or for knife throwing or other type of sporting events that are not typically what you would see on ESPN. But there are competitions where you can test your skill set for shooting. And these are all things that were completely oblivious to me. I did not know they existed until I started talking with other people and realizing how many options were out there. And I was like, wow, it just blew my mind. So that's where the appeal of the firearm started expanding for me. So once I got my concealed carry, and I was no longer limited to buying purchase permits, because in the state of North Carolina, you have to get a purchase permit before you can buy a pistol for each pistol. But when you have your concealed carry, sky's the limit. You can walk into the store and just buy your piece right there. You'll still use it. Your background check is still being performed, but now it's a lot easier for you to make your purchase, because your concealed carry dictates that you've already gone through the procedures necessary to formally show that you have gone through the background check and that you've established the privilege to be able to purchase additional firearms at your discretion. So, and let me backtrack. Not your privilege, but it's your right, but it's a luxury of being able to purchase at your own discretion, because not everybody can just walk in and do that. So for me, in my personal opinion, that's more of like a luxury and a privilege in a sense. So we're not going to go into the whole aspects of, oh, this is your right, your God-given right, or anything in the Constitution. We're not going to that route. But in either case, once I could receive my concealed carry, it became a nice door opening for multiple opportunities and options. So it went from me just having my one little Taurus G3 to now I'm purchasing HKVP9. I'm purchasing a Springfield Hellcat. I'm purchasing other guns. I bought my first AR rifle. And all these had different intents and purposes, and it's almost like a tattoo for some. And for people who have tattoos, they'll know this analogy and this reference, because once you get one, it's hard to say no to another one, because it almost becomes an addiction. And not to say that it's a bad addiction or anything like that, but once you start realizing that there's so much you can do and so many options available to you, and every firearm is different in the feel, how it acts, and what it can do, that you want to experience that. So for me, it definitely developed from strictly being a home defense option to now being something where I have multiple options for different situations and different purposes, in a sense. So I have some for home defense. I have one for everyday carry. I have one for strictly going to the range and plinking. I have multiple options for if this as sort of like a backup, where if this particular firearm is inaccessible at the time, or if I'm low on ammo, or if I'm unable to use it the way it's supposed to for whatever reason, I have an alternative option available to me that can serve the same purpose. And for the most part, any firearm can be used as a home defense, but there are certain firearms that their specialty is geared more towards a different purpose or rationale other than home defense. And I say all of this to basically point out that when it comes to you and when your time comes for when you're going to make a purchase, these are some of the things that you're going to want to consider. You want to ask yourself, why do I need a particular firearm? Like, what is the purpose of this firearm? What am I going to use it for? That should be your first question once you decide that you want to buy a firearm. What is the purpose of that firearm? Is it going to be for home defense? Do I want to take it to the range and have it where every single time I go to the range, this is what I'm going to use to expunge all that negative energy around me? Is this going to be a firearm that I intend to carry on my person once I have a legal concealed carry permit? Is this what I'm going to use for my own personal protection anytime I leave my house premises? These are things that you want to ask yourself first. Once you answer those questions for yourself, that particular question. Once you have that question answered, then you can move on to the next question. What do I want to use it for? In terms of, what do I need to make it work? Do you want to add things like optics? Do you want to add things like lights for seeing in dark situations? What kind of modifications do I intend on putting on there? If the answer is no to any of that, then boom, you move on. If the option is that, yeah, I want to add a light on there, or do I want to add an optic, then you can do additional research for what kind of peripherals you want to get. What accessories do you feel are pertinent to that purpose that you answered in your first question? And once you have that question answered, having a little moment there. But once you've answered that question, now you can get on to the most important question: what is your budget? And that will help you avoid the pitfalls of making a purchase that you'll regret. So once again, ask yourself, what is the purpose for this firearm? What accessories do I need to help me fulfill that purpose? And what is my budget? So hopefully my experience going for my first firearm and how I went from being just for home defense to now expanding to multiple avenues of how I have and why I personally have multiple firearms can give you some light as well, because everyone doesn't come into to the firearm world gung-ho and buying 15 million guns. It doesn't happen like that. A lot of us just buy one gun for one particular purpose, and eventually some of us branch out and start going to other directions. Some of us go into the direction of, we just want to have multiple firearms for multiple purposes just to have fun, but at the same time have all of our bases covered. Some of us are buying multiple firearms because we have tactical aspirations in mind, and we want to have fail-safes for just in case scenarios across the board, just so they can be pragmatic about going forward and accomplishing their home defense and tactical goals, and having everything squared away in preparation for that just in case. Others, you may just feel like all you need is one gun, but you just want to have an idea of what gun to get, and that's the what gun is going to be the best to suit your personal purposes. So at the end of the day, these are all questions that will be answered, and additional questions may come about, or you might find that over the course of these videos that I'll be providing, that the questions that you had have been answered. But in either case, I hope that I've helped you get some clarity as far as why some people, including myself, became enthusiasts, and why we ended up going from one gun to having multiple guns. There's nothing wrong with having multiple. There's nothing wrong with having just one. Everybody is different. Everybody has a different purpose. And as long as you feel comfortable with what your purpose is, that's all that matters at the end of the day. So this is Wickham 2A checking out. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, like and subscribe. Make sure to tell your friends. Pass it on the information. Each one teach one is our motto at the Triangle NC Gun Club, as well as for NAGA. And I hope that you share that same aspiration as well, that for every bit of information that you receive, you share with other people as well. Thank you, and continue with the journey.